Welcome back to our channel. The year was 1975. America was caught in the whirlwind of change, still reeling from the aftershocks of Watergate, watching the end of the Vietnam War unfold, and preparing for the nation's bicentennial celebration just a year away. Amid the political unrest and cultural transitions, the U.S. Mint continued its relentless duty, striking coins by the millions. The Roosevelt Dime, a mainstay since 1946, continued its silent legacy. Small, light, and often forgotten in change jars, it bore Franklin D. Roosevelt's profile on the obverse and the torch flanked by olive and oak branches on the reverse, a design symbolic of liberty, peace, and strength. In 1975, both the Philadelphia and Denver mints produced Roosevelt Dimes in massive quantities. The San Francisco Mint focused its efforts on proof coins for collectors, prepping for the soon-to-arrive 1976 dual-date coins. But in this unassuming year, tucked quietly between anniversaries and headlines, something slipped through, a deviation so minor in appearance, yet so staggering in consequence, it would take decades for its magnitude to fully emerge. The 1975 Roosevelt Dime should not exist without a date. And yet, a few somehow do. When a collector named Vincent, an unassuming man in his 60s with a soft-spoken fascination for post-war coinage, sorted through a proof set purchased at a garage sale in the late 90s, he nearly missed it. The set was unmarked, dusty, and missing its original plastic case. It held the typical roster: Lincoln cent, Jefferson nickel, Roosevelt dime, Washington quarter, and Kennedy half, all minted in proof condition. He examined them one by one, admiring the mirror-like surfaces and crisp details. When he turned his attention to the dime, something struck him as off. The coin was beautiful, sharp, reflective, perfect in finish, but the year, the date, was missing. At first, he thought the light was playing tricks. He tilted the coin, then held it under his loupe. There was no mistake. The coin bore the typical obverse design, but beneath Roosevelt's neck, where the date should sit, was a smooth, empty field. Vincent blinked. Then he blinked again. He knew that the Roosevelt dime had been minted with the year 1975. He also knew that the only exception, the only Roosevelt dimes without a date from that era, shouldn't exist. The U.S. Mint began preparing bicentennial designs for 1976 with a unique dual date, 1776 to 1976. But the dime wasn't part of that commemorative series. The Roosevelt dime was to remain unchanged during the transition, and it was never issued with a special bicentennial reverse. So how could this dime, pristine, proof quality, minted from the San Francisco Mint, judging by the mirror finish, have no date? He didn't panic. He didn't call attention to it. Vincent placed the coin carefully in a flip and stored it away, unsure of what to make of it. He spent weeks researching, combing through every numismatic journal, catalog, and grading service archive he could find. His fingers traced the pages of auction records, but there was no mention of a 1975 Roosevelt dime without a date. Not until he contacted a coin dealer with ties to a major grading agency did the whispers begin. One had been seen before. Just one. The theory was chilling in its simplicity. In preparation for the bicentennial year, the Mint had begun making 1,976 proof dies in late 1974. In the narrow gap between retiring the 1974 proof dies and introducing the 1976 dual-dated ones, a small number of dime dies had been manufactured without a date, test dies, perhaps never meant for public release. It was likely that a single misstep occurred. One of these prototype reverse dies, or perhaps an unfinished obverse die, had been paired and used by accident or oversight to strike a minuscule number of coins. These dateless dimes were not meant to exist. They weren't cataloged. They weren't approved. They were supposed to be melted down before leaving the mint. Yet, somehow, one or two had escaped. Vincent's discovery soon made the rounds in niche collector circles. Some dismissed it. Others scoffed, claiming it was a misstrike or a polished coin. But those who saw the piece in person, its mirror surface, the flawless strike, the clear presence of a San Francisco S mint mark, and most importantly, the total absence of the date, knew it was something else entirely. A proof coin, struck in 1975, without a date. The response from the grading service was measured. They authenticated the coin and assigned it a unique designation. 1975 NOS Roosevelt Dime, obverse die omitted date. It was, in their view, among the rarest errors ever seen in a modern proof coin. At first, the coin's value was nearly impossible to estimate. Some speculated it could fetch a few $1,000s. Others dared to whisper 5 figures. Vincent refused to sell. The coin had become more than metal, it had become a piece of numismatic mythology. Then, years later, lightning struck again. A second coin surfaced, this time submitted anonymously. It bore the same features, proof condition, San Francisco mint mark, no date. This one, however, showed slightly weaker details on the reverse, suggesting it had been struck later in the die's life. And it ignited a firestorm. The market woke up. Bidders who had ignored the story in previous years now sat up straight. Collectors who once rolled their eyes at the tale of the dateless dime now studied auction catalogs and back issues of Coin World with renewed obsession. What if more were out there? The second coin sold privately for an amount that, though undisclosed, was rumored to exceed $20,000. The value curve steepened quickly. By the time whispers of a third specimen reached Vincent's ears, he knew the window of secrecy had closed. He brought his dime out of its quiet resting place, had it regraded, and watched the market spiral into anticipation. When it finally reached the auction block, it was described not just as an error, but as an anomaly, a modern miracle of numismatic chance. It sold for $38,700. Not bad for a dime that, by all government standards, shouldn't have existed. But that wasn't the end. During further analysis, something peculiar emerged from the grading lab. Under specialized lighting and microscopic enhancement, a faint ghost image appeared in the field beneath Roosevelt's profile on Vincent's dime. It was not a date, not in the traditional sense, but a partial impression. The theory? A die polishing incident had occurred after the date had been weakly impressed on the die, scraping away the numerals, leaving behind only microscopic remnants, a whisper of the year, almost erased. This revelation led to a new debate. Was the coin a true no-date error, or a mispolished die that created a one-of-a-kind, phantom date? Proof? Vincent's coin, now enshrined in both numismatic legend and scholarly mystery, was unique again, not merely undated, but potentially the only example where the absence of a date was deliberate, created not by oversight but by correction gone too far. A mistake corrected imperfectly. Collectors began reevaluating not just 1975 proof sets, but their understanding of how such sets were created, assembled, and handled within the mint. Could there have been more experimental dies in use that year? Could an entire subset of transitional pieces remain unaccounted for? The government, as expected, issued no statement. The story of the 1975 Roosevelt Dime error became a quiet obsession, a riddle that wrapped history, technology, and fate into a coin that fit neatly in the palm of one's hand. It challenged what was known, rewrote what was assumed, and suggested that even in the most automated of systems, human error, or perhaps human decision, could still produce something extraordinary. The coin became a symbol, not just of rarity, but of the unknown. For every verified example, there might be another lying unrecognized in an attic box, a proof set long forgotten, or a jar of loose change from a parent's estate. Its value, while quantifiable in numbers, was infinitely more elusive in meaning. Even now, collectors scan the faces of 1975 proof dimes with hawk-like precision, hoping to catch that elusive blankness, that still silence where a date should be. Because sometimes, the most valuable thing on a coin isn't what you see, but what's missing. In the hum of machines at the Philadelphia Mint in 1981, as blank copper-nickel discs clinked and chimed their way down steel chutes and conveyor belts, no one noticed anything unusual. Dime production continued in full swing that year, following a pattern that had remained mostly unchanged since 1965. Roosevelt on the obverse, torch flanked by olive and oak branches on the reverse, struck in layers of copper and nickel, with a mintage count in the hundreds of millions. The country was steeped in economic tension, inflation raged, gas prices remained volatile, and unemployment held steady in a post-recession lull. Coins were still needed in great numbers for everyday transactions, but their symbolic importance had diminished under the shadow of rising electronic banking and credit cards. Still, every day, the dimes were minted countless, near identical, machines turning out sameness by the second. The 1981 Roosevelt Dime was, by all accounts, unremarkable. Philadelphia produced over 500 million of them. Denver, not far behind. San Francisco, true to its purpose, struck proof coins in smaller numbers. It was routine, predictable, controlled, and yet, tucked somewhere between the millions of dimes that passed through the mechanical hands of the mint, a sliver of disorder emerged so subtle, so minute, that even seasoned eyes missed it. Not a misaligned die. Not a clipped planchet. This error was smarter, more elusive. It slipped through every checkpoint undetected. It was born not of haste, but of minute failure, a combination of mechanical fatigue and human oversight. A ghost in the gears. Years later, in a quiet suburb of Oregon, a collector named Marion stumbled upon it. She was retired, recently widowed, and had taken up coin collecting as both a pastime and a form of meditation. Her late husband, Henry, had kept boxes of pocket change tucked in drawers and jars from his days working at the local train depot. He had saved every coin without discrimination. For months, Marion sorted through them. Lincoln cents, Jefferson nickels, state quarters, and dimes, so many dimes. She wasn't a professional. Her knowledge came from library books, internet forums, and long conversations at coin shows. But she had an eye, a quiet patience. When she saw the 1981 dime under her magnifier Philadelphia issue, no mid-mark something made her pause. The coin looked normal at first glance. Roosevelt's portrait. The motto "In God We Trust." The date 1981 clearly present. But the more she studied it, the more discomfort she felt. It wasn't just a matter of appearance. It was weight. Or rather, the lack of it. She weighed it on a digital scale. The reading came back 2.27 grams. Below the standard 2.268, 2.2685 gram specification for a copper nickel-clad Roosevelt dime. Not drastically off, but enough to raise suspicion. She flipped the coin again. That's when she noticed the edges. They weren't reeded. Smooth. Flat. No grooves. No ridges dot a Roosevelt dime with a plain edge. Her first thought was damage. A coin worn smooth by decades of circulation. But the rest of the coin was crisp. The devices were clean. Details sharp. That didn't fit. She tried to file the observation away and move on, but the thought itched at her. Days later, she brought the coin to a small local coin show. A dealer, older gentleman with thick glasses and a gruff voice, turned the coin over once, twice, and squinted. "Could be struck on a foreign planchet," he muttered. "They do that sometimes. Or a defective blank. Seen it before. But it's a 1981, Marion said, almost whispering. "Those should be clad. They should have ridges." The dealer shrugged. "Sometimes the collar die fails. No reeds." That made sense, sort of. The collar die, the part that imparts the reeded edge, could fail or be improperly installed. But something still didn't fit. The coin wasn't just smooth-edged. It also felt thinner. Lighter. Off. Marion took it to another show, this time larger, in Portland. She paid a small fee to have it looked at by a numismatic consultant working on behalf of a grading service. He examined it under high magnification, weighed it on precision scales, tested its conductivity. Then he leaned back and exhaled slowly. "What you have," he said, "isn't just a collar die failure. This dime wasn't struck on a U.S. dime planchet. Marion's heart stopped. It looks like it was struck on a planchet mint for a U.S. 5-cent coin from the Philippines. They were being minted around this time. Similar diameter. Lighter weight. Wrong metal composition, though. Yours is more nickel-heavy than copper. Probably an experimental planchet or an international contract slip. Either way, it's not supposed to be in U.S. circulation. She didn't know how to respond. The consultant offered to help submit the coin for formal authentication. Weeks passed. When the results came back, the label read, 1981 Roosevelt Dime, struck on foreign planchet plain edge misaligned collar experimental alloys suspected. The grading agency wouldn't speculate on how many of these might exist. Possibly only one. Maybe a handful. There was no record of the mint intentionally producing Roosevelt Dimes on these foreign blanks. It wasn't a pattern. It was a fluke and accident that left behind no documentation. The value at first was uncertain. A few emails to collectors yielded polite interest. Modest offers $500, maybe $1,000. Marion declined. She wasn't ready to sell. Then came the article. A regional numismatic magazine published a short piece titled The Ghost Dime of 1981, referencing Marion's find and its mysterious origin. That's when the tide shifted. Within weeks, 3 more examples surfaced, one in Michigan, one in Florida, one in a dealer's back stock in Nevada. All shared the same characteristics: 1981 date, no mint mark, plain edge, lightweight, and slightly off metal tonality. The Nevada piece was especially notable, graded -58 Australian dollars, nearly uncirculated, but with a darker tone and unusual dye-polished lines on the reverse. The market took notice. The Florida specimen went to auction and brought back $3,900. The Michigan coin, discovered in a box of old vending machine rejects, realized $5,100 at a larger venue. Suddenly, Marion's coin, once an oddity, once a curiosity, was now a benchmark. In the next major coin auction, she consigned it. The write-up was elegant. Possibly the earliest known 1981 Roosevelt Dime struck on a foreign nickel alloy planchet with plain edge and misaligned collar. One of the finest preserved. Exceptionally rare. The bidding war began with a whisper. Then a flurry. 6,000. 7. 8. And then silence until one final bid pushed it beyond expectation. $12,600. The final hammer fell. The room murmured. The sale made headlines in collector circles. The 1981 dime error was now canon, a documented, studied, cataloged error in mainstream grading databases. Its value had spiked not just because of scarcity, but because of mystery. What was the origin of the planchet? Why was the collar die misaligned? Why were multiple examples found in far-flung corners of the country? Then came the twist. A retired mint employee, reading about the auction, stepped forward anonymously. He had worked at the Philadelphia Mint in the late 70s and early 80s, during a period when the mint was fulfilling overseas contracts for multiple foreign governments, including the Philippines. According to his recollection, there had been a brief mix-up in late 1980 involving blanks mint for 5-centimo coins. They got into the U.S. production line, he said, under condition of anonymity. Not a lot. Maybe a roll or two. I remember a supervisor saying, "They're close enough. Don't stop the presses. Close enough. Don't stop the presses." If that was true, then the error wasn't an accident. It was a decision. A calculated gamble that no one would notice. And they didn't for decades. Now, with 4 confirmed examples and speculation about more, the numismatic world had a new obsession. The 1981 Roosevelt Dime, once one of the most forgettable coins in U.S. history, had become a symbol of hidden stories, overlooked anomalies, and buried truths. Collectors began hunting 1981 dimes with new intensity. Weight checks. Edge inspections. Metal analysis. What was once considered a junk coin was now a potential goldmine, but none have surpassed Marion's coin in condition, clarity, or legend. It wasn't just the error that made it valuable. It was the silence. The years it spent unnoticed in a jar. The quiet patience of the woman who found it. The hidden choices of Mint employees who made a call decades ago, thinking no one would care, but someone did. And because of that, the 1981 Roosevelt Dime, simple, silent, small, became something rare. Not just a coin. A question. A challenge. A treasure. In the quiet churn of 1982, the U.S. Mint was buried under layers of transition. Economic pressures were mounting, copper prices were fluctuating wildly, and policymakers were pushing hard for a cheaper coin production process. It wasn't the grand coins, the quarters, or the half-dollars that bore the brunt of this change. It was the dime, almost forgotten in its daily use, yet crucial in its purpose. And it was here, in the machinery of practical decision-making, where the smallest of details unraveled into something much more than routine. The 1982 Roosevelt Dime, expected to conform neatly to the designs and standards of the decade, was caught in a silent transformation. A mid-year shift in production meant that the Philadelphia Mint began striking dimes without including the P Mint mark, a symbol that had only started appearing on dimes 2 years earlier, in 1980. The change wasn't deliberate, at least not fully. Somewhere in the cadence of minting, something slipped. Or rather, was forgotten. In an environment where millions of coins were produced daily, it's easy to imagine how a die without a mint mark might go unnoticed. Perhaps it was an old die, reintroduced hastily during maintenance. Perhaps it was simply overlooked, buried beneath the urgency of keeping production numbers on schedule. Whatever the cause, the result was subtle, almost invisible. A dime missing just one tiny letter. And yet, in numismatics, silence often speaks loudest. That missing P meant everything. Not that anyone noticed, at least, not at first. The dimes circulated freely, spending their days in soda machines and diner counters. To the public, they were worth exactly 10 cents. But as time passed, and collectors began scrutinizing their change with keener eyes, whispers began to stir. It was an ordinary day when Charles Delaney, a hobbyist coin enthusiast with a talent for spotting anomalies, found himself thumbing through a handful of dimes at a flea market in rural Pennsylvania. His process was methodical, unhurried. There was something meditative about it. And then he noticed it. A 1982 Roosevelt Dime. Lightly worn, nothing remarkable at first glance. But Charles's thumb paused, then reversed, brushing the obverse with more scrutiny. No mint mark. He turned it over again, certain he'd overlooked it. He held it to the light. Still nothing. His heart didn't leap immediately. That would come later. And yet, here was one that didn't. Charles pocketed the dime quietly, feeling its weight increase tenfold with suspicion. He didn't tell the vendor. Not yet. Back home, he compared it with others. He placed it side by side with a 1982 P dime. The designs matched perfectly. Roosevelt's bust, the date, the torch and olive branch reverse. Everything was identical. Everything but that missing mark. A few calls to fellow collectors didn't yield much. A missing mint mark wasn't unheard of. But on a coin post 1980? That raised eyebrows. One expert in New York dismissed it at first, citing possible damage or wear. But when Charles sent in photographs, the mood shifted. This wasn't wear. This wasn't a post-mint alteration. This was genuine. Word began to spread slowly through collector circles. An error like this wasn't just a curiosity, it was a time-stamped signature of an oversight, a window into the quiet flaws of a massive production system. And like most rare errors, it was a phantom. For every one confirmed, countless others might have slipped by unnoticed, or worse, been lost to time. The market responded in quiet ripples at first. A few error dimes began to surface at coin shows, their prices modest but rising. $20. Then $50. Then $100. Dealers were cautious. Was this a fluke? A single rogue die? Or was there an entire batch waiting to be discovered, By the late 1980s, enough specimens had emerged to confirm the truth this was no isolated case. These weren't individually damaged coins, but genuine mint errors, and they were far rarer than initially believed. Estimates varied, but the consensus was clear. Only a fraction of the total 1982 Philadelphia mintage lacked the mint mark. The price began to climb. In 1991, a pristine example graded MS65 by PCGS fetched $325 at a local auction. Not headline-making, but enough to draw the attention of more serious collectors. The chase was on now. Error hunters scoured rolls of 1982 dimes, scouring bank boxes, estate collections, and yard sales. Most found nothing, but a few struck gold. By the early 2000s, the 1982 Nopi Roosevelt Dime had evolved from anomaly to legend. Prices for mint state examples surged past $1,000. Those few who had held on to their early finds, like Charles Delaney, were now sitting on miniature treasures. But it wasn't just the monetary value, it was the story, the discovery, the serendipity of it all. Each coin represented a moment where something small had escaped the relentless eye of industry. The error itself remained deceptively simple: a missing mint mark. But numismatists knew better. Errors of this nature, true errors, not varieties or post-mint damages, offered a tangible link to history. They weren't just coins, they were narratives. And in the case of the 1982 dime, the narrative was only beginning to unravel, because in 2017, something peculiar surfaced. A collector in Illinois submitted a 1982 Nopi dime to NGC for grading. It was a typical submission, but when the graders examined it under magnification, they noticed something odd. Not just the absence of the mint mark, but faint doubling on the torch on the reverse side. A new twist. Die doubling. It had never been documented before in conjunction with the Nopi error. Experts initially debated whether this was legitimate doubling or machine doubling. But multiple submissions followed, and a pattern began to form. A small subset of these Nopi dimes displayed the same doubling on the reverse, especially around the torch and olive branches. Collectors were stunned. The already rare error had just become rarer still. A subclass within a subclass. Prices soared accordingly. A Nopi with documented reverse doubling sold for $3,800 at a private auction in early 2018. Another, in slightly lower condition, changed hands for $2,100 later that year. And then came the twist no one expected. A hobbyist researcher named Elaine Carter, digging through U.S. mint production logs from the early 1980s, stumbled upon an internal memo from May 1982. The memo, buried in a batch of microfilm documents, described a temporary shortage of updated Philadelphia obverse dies due to a shipping delay. To maintain production, the mint authorized the reuse of older obverse dies, specifically pre-1980 dies that had never included the P mint mark. The implication was staggering. This wasn't a simple error in the die production process. It was a calculated decision made under logistical duress. The U.S. Mint, in its effort to avoid a slowdown, had quietly decided to reuse old dies without informing the public. The result? A sanctioned error. This revelation shifted the narrative entirely. The Nopi dime wasn't just an accident, it was a deliberate compromise, born of necessity and cloaked in silence. Collectors were left stunned. The coin they'd been chasing wasn't the product of a mishap. It was the result of a buried bureaucratic choice. Prices reacted swiftly. A high-grade Nopi dime with the reverse doubling, now viewed through the lens of this new information, hit the auction floor in 2019 and commanded a staggering $6,700. The buyer? A private investor who had recently entered the numismatic market after reading an article on rare modern coin errors. The coin, once worth 10 cents, was now an asset of growing intrigue and historical weight, and as always, the shadows of numismatics deepen with time. Rumors persist that a very small batch of these reused dies included transitional design elements, microscopic differences in Roosevelt's profile and font alignment, features too subtle for the untrained eye. If confirmed, they could represent yet another layer of rarity, creating a trifecta of anomalies: missing mint mark, reverse doubling, and transitional obverse elements. The 1982 Nopi dime has become more than a coin. It's a testament to the unintended stories hidden in the machinery of progress. A moment where urgency met oversight, and where ordinary metal became extraordinary through absence. Collectors today still search, rolling dimes through magnifying lenses, hoping for that faint, quiet void where a letter should be. Because sometimes, in numismatics, the absence of something speaks louder than its presence.